Many people stand against the backdrop of the city at night. They are illuminated by pink, blue, and white lights coming from the skyscrapers that are around them. The men and women look confident and strong. They all stand with straight backs. Some are serious, and some have a smile on their faces. 5 years ago, people appeared in whom the power awakened. A group of young people are relaxing on an open-air site. One girl, dressed in a black top with long sleeves and swimming trunks of the same color, sits with her feet in the water. The second girl with red hair gathered in a high ponytail sits in the pool, leaning her hands on the side. The girl in the top smiles widely and raised her hand with a glass containing some kind of drink. Behind, near the glass fence, there is a couple. The young man leans slightly towards the girl and is apparently telling her something. The young man with light pink hair holds a glass in his hand. His hand glows blue and this glow extends to the contents of the glass. There is a slight smile on the young man's face. 2 workers sit near building blocks with holes. One of them is wearing a protective helmet and an orange vest. He shows the phone to the second man, who is holding a glass of something in his hands, his safety helmet lying on the ground near his feet. Both men are holding cigarettes. Some application is open on the phone, and 2 men are fighting on the screen. One kicks the other, which is engulfed in a red-orange glow. The man who was hit stands in a fighting stance with his hands out in front of him. While the world was undergoing major changes, mixed martial arts also found itself divided into 2 categories. The 2 fighters are dressed only in sports shorts and protective gloves on their hands. They are both well-trained, their bodies bulging with pumped-up muscles. The leg of the man, who is wearing red shorts, has acquired a lava texture, as if it is covered with many cracks. The second fighter tries to dodge the blow. However, the first one's foot still reaches him. A yellow light emanates from the cracks on the attacker's leg. In the ring, behind the net, the battle unfolds. The audience sits with enthusiastic and interested looks. Their eyes and mouths are wide open, which means they are involved in battle. Some people's hands are clenched into fists. Someone puts their palms to their foreheads. The first category is the League of Gifted People, or DK for short. There are practically no spectators on the red seats of the stands. One man even fell asleep, saliva flowing from his mouth. Behind him, a few rows higher, another man in a hat was sitting. There are 2 men standing in the ring. One of them has his arms out in front of him. The second looks relaxed. His arms are down along his body. He is moving around the arena. They are illuminated by spotlights, but practically no one is watching the battle. The stands are empty. The second category is the League of the Untalented, or MMA for short. A man with shoulder-length dark hair stands behind the empty seats and looks down. She is a young girl with bright yellow eyes. She smiles contentedly, her lips pressed together, her bangs blocking her view and getting into her eyes. She has a desire to return the League of Untalented People who were left in the shadows to their former glory. The girl leaned her elbows on the fence. With her other hand she supported her cheek. She is wearing a brown shirt with a tie and a beige jacket. With a satisfied and slightly dreamy smile, she looks down, tilting her head slightly. She thinks it doesn't matter how much debt the league has. It's very stupid to just take over and hand over leadership over her like that. She wonders if they don't realize that mixed martial arts is so underrated. Shadows fell strangely on her face. The girl pressed her fist to her lips and, continuing to smile, raised her eyebrows slightly. She thinks that this sport is actually a real chance to succeed. The girl looks at the ring, where the opponents are preparing for battle. There seem to be no people in the hall, not even any staff. Perhaps this is just a training session. A strong man with a trained body stands in a stance with his hands folded in front of him in a special way. Beads of sweat run down his face and body. He looks very tense and focused. The girl thinks that if she manages to make the league a hit at the box office, then the money is guaranteed to flow in like a river. Fighter's feet without shoes. One of the men walks across the ring. The girl thinks that she just needs to do something. One of the fighters stands with his head tilted to the side. He has a wide smile on his face that shows his teeth. He asks someone if he is tired. His bangs fall in his face in disarray. The man spread his arms to the sides with his palms facing the enemy. He asks him if he should only use his left hand. The thing a girl needs to do is to cancel the fact of permanent exclusion of one guy, that's all. The second man looks very tired and angry. The veins on his face and neck were bulging. His mouth was wide open, and his eyes were rolled up. He clenched one hand into a fist and brought it to his chest. The girl thinks that she needs to do this so that she, being an ordinary person without a gift, can succeed. The man calls his opponent a not very affectionate word. Grinning widely and closing his eyes, he swings his arm and is about to attack. A fighter with bangs stands calmly. The tired man exclaims, is his opponent really not going to defend himself? He says that he says so, but he does not finish the sentence and is interrupted. The fist flies straight into the man's face, who has his mouth wide open and his teeth exposed. He stares straight ahead, veins popping out on his forehead. A battle ensues and the men wave their fists. A man with short crew-cut hair looks attentively and intently in front of him. Beads of sweat run down his face. A young man with bangs throws a strong punch. He hits the enemy right in the face, causing him to fly back with his head up. The young man with bangs has a wide and self-confident smile on his face. He finishes his sentence and asks his opponent if he cares. The girl with yellow eyes is contentedly watching what is happening in the ring. A shadow falls across half of her face, hiding her eyes. She thinks that a young man with bangs will be of great use. A young man with bangs smiles madly, showing his teeth. His eyes are wide open and his pupils are strongly constricted. The enemy's blood is on his face and hands. He sits on the fallen fighter and punches him, holds the man's head with one hand. Blood flies in different directions. The blows are very strong. Someone is thinking about this person getting a good deal. A young man with bangs smiles joyfully while standing against the backdrop of posters with sponsors. He shows his middle finger and rests his other hand on his side. Behind him are two girls who, although smiling, look nervous. The young man's name is Hwang Guanho. He is an MMA champion, a professional, with 49 victories and 1 defeat to his name. The newspaper spread shows a photo of Hwang Guanho, and next to it there is a small article. There is a stamp on top of the photo and article with a warning message. The headline of the article states that fighter Hwang Guanho crossed the line and received a permanent expulsion. This is the reason why he was expelled forever. The spectators in the stands were excited. Many jumped up from their seats. Someone raised their hands up. Someone pointed their finger in front of them in indignation. You can hear people screaming that someone is a rag and a squalor. Some people ask how he still considers himself a professional. Hwang Guanho stands in the ring, covered in blood. He slightly bent his back. One hand was clenched into a fist and was at chest level, the other was lowered down. He looks towards the stands, his mouth wide open and his eyebrows furrowed. The young man looked furious. He shouts that of course he is still a professional, because he gets money, and calls the shouting spectator a bad word. Provocative words and behavior, inciting riots, all led to his expulsion. Hwang Guanho holds his opponent by the hair and grins smugly. He raised his fist and is about to strike again. The enemy's face is twisted in pain. He is covered in blood. His rough fighting style was also the reason for his exclusion. A young man stands in front of a closed door, above which a green sign with a man running away is lit. The guy clenched his hands into fists and looked ahead. There is a tiger painted on the back of his jacket, and the sleeves of his clothing are covered in blood, as are his hands. The bottom of the door is also stained with blood, as are the walls and floor. One incident also resulted in expulsion. A girl with yellow eyes sits in a chair in front of the monitor. One of her hands is raised, a finger is pressed to her lips, and with the other she is holding a computer mouse. The girl smiles slightly and seems to be in anticipation. She thinks that she desperately needs Hwang Guanho. A black diagram with low indicators is shown, and only at one moment the scale is at the maximum. The girl sits in a dark room. It is illuminated only by the light emanating from the monitor. A jacket is draped over the back of her chair, and on the table in front of the monitor are stationery, a telephone and a mug. In the distance, in the darkness of the room, a small table is visible. She needs Hwang Guanho because when he was in the league, all the indicators were at the maximum. The face of the yellow-eyed girl is illuminated by the light from the monitor. She grins at the screen, a bead of sweat running down her cheek. She thinks that even if others don't know, she understands that this guy is doing all this for the box office. The girl pressed her hand to her face, as if covering her mouth. However, this did not help. You can still see that she is smiling widely, exposing her teeth. Her eyebrows are slightly raised. Her gaze is interested and joyful. She laughs quietly, thinking at the same time that this guy is a genius, also with a natural talent for turning it all into a whole show. Suddenly the girl's face changed dramatically. She looks ahead with bewilderment, annoyance and slight contempt. Hwang Guanho lies on the sofa, surrounded by snacks and cans of soda. A young man looks at his phone, which he holds very close to his face. The girl stands near the table and looks at him. Hwang Guanho suddenly starts laughing. He rolls over onto his back and looks at the phone with his mouth wide open. Tears flow from his eyes from laughter. He continues to laugh loudly. After the match, his condition remains like this. A girl dressed in trousers and a shirt with a tie stands next to Hwang Guanho. She folds her arms over her chest and looks at him indignantly and perplexedly. He glances sideways at the girl. She asks what he's even doing now. The young man sits down, lowering one leg to the floor, bending the other at the knee and placing it on the sofa. A wide smile shines on his face. His hand with the phone is lowered on his bent knee. He asks the girl if she doesn't see that he keeps himself in good shape and takes care of himself. The girl bears her mouth wide, her teeth clenched tightly. She looks at the guy. The girl came closer to Hwang Guanho, spread her arms to the sides and opened her mouth wide in a scream. Her eyes are rounded and her eyebrows are drawn down to the bridge of her nose. She looks very angry and indignant. The young man sits with his back bent and his head down. The girl is indignant that she returned him on the condition that he would help her put on a show and spectacle, and if he continued to behave like this, then something would happen. But she did not finish her sentence. Hwang Guangho pretends to have forgotten about the show and says that something just occurred to him. He puts his hand on the girl's shoulder and squeezes it. He stands next to her, putting his arm around her shoulders and showing her something on his phone. He is not at all embarrassed by the rebuke and smiles widely. The girl looks at the phone screen with suspicion. Hwang Guanho asks the girl how she likes this plan. Some news application is open on the phone screen. There is a green stripe at the top and different tabs at the bottom. Now the tab with popular news is open. It says that MS Grigo is against grandmother 500 people. 400,000 people requested this news. Hwang Guanho continues to hug the girl by the shoulders and smile. They both look at the phone. The girl's face expresses great surprise. Her mouth is slightly open and her eyebrows are raised. She took the phone from him and frowned at the screen. The girl's pupils are greatly constricted. Her mouth is wide open in a scream. She seems angry and dissatisfied. A young man stands behind her and points with his finger, a wide smile on his face. The girl is surprised and asks what kind of idiotic posts these are. The young man says that this is very funny and asks her to confirm it. Hwang Guanho folded his arms over his chest, hugging himself. He opened his mouth wide, showing his teeth, tears flowing from his eyes. He laughs and says that if it were him, he would definitely go and see it. The girl is holding a phone in her hands and looking back over her shoulder. A drop of sweat runs down her cheek. She frowns and twists her mouth in anger. She thinks that things are bad, asks herself if the people who called him trash were right. The girl turns to Hwang Guanho and turns the phone in his direction. She points her finger at the phone screen and has her mouth wide open in a scream. She is so indignant and angry that she even spits while talking. Hwang Guanho stands in front of her, one hand on his side and the other wiping tears from his eyes. The girl says that even if such a match lasted 100 days, not a single person would come to watch and asks the guy if he understands this. He continues to say that in this situation the entire league will be under attack. The guy laughing says that this is a level. The girl points an angry finger at Hwang Guanho, her mouth wide open in a scream. The young man stands and looks at her, smiling. He says that if she doesn't like it, then she can look at other publications. This is the largest martial arts website in their country. The girl says that everyone thinks that since he is the largest, that means he is good. The girl still does not calm down. She holds the phone in her hand and continues to reprimand the young man. Her eyebrows are furrowed. Her gaze expresses complete indignation and anger. She asks Hwang Guanho if he has any idea how much garbage there is on such and such a scale. Orders him to look, starting with the title, in summaries of the best recommendations among posts. The girl holds the phone with both hands and looks into it. She is still indignant and angry. Behind her you can see a desktop and cabinets with a large number of folders. She reads one of the headlines. Who will win if you put an amateur among the gifted and a professional among the untalented? Then there is complete nonsense. The girl's gaze is directed downwards. She looks carefully and intently. A strong, pumped-up man stands in the ring wearing red boxing gloves. His eyes are hidden in the shadows, but from his face you can tell that he is serious, focused, and absolutely calm. A belt with a large gold plaque is attached to his torso. A young man dressed in a t-shirt and sports shorts swings his leg and hits something. The impact causes a blue flash. The first man is a man who performed a super punch with just his fist 30 years ago. And the second is a gifted amateur who went to a taekwondo studio for 2 years. Begs the question of who would win if you put them against each other. The number of requests for this entry is 480,476, and the number of comments is 1,425. The girl scrolls through the comments to this post. Opinions are divided. Some people write that a gifted player will win. Others bet on a professional player. One person writes that the difference between these fighters is huge. The girl looks at the screen in surprise. Her eyebrows are raised up and her mouth is slightly open. She seems focused on reading. She asks a question out loud. Something even more or less what she is talking about is not particularly clear. probably about comments. Hwang Guanho walked up to her and stood next to her, looking at the phone screen. One of his hands is on his belt. He looks surprised. He asks her if there really are any normal ones. The girl mentally draws up a plan, which is that it is necessary to interest everyone in the fight between the gifted and the untalented. Hwang Guanho takes the phone from the girl's hands and looks at it with obvious surprise. He stands with his hand on his side. The girl is slightly away from him and looks thoughtful. She closed her eyes and raised her hand to her chin. She wonders if there is a chance. Hwang Guanho is surprised that there are actually normal comments. The young man holds the phone in both hands. He looks at the screen with confusion and without a smile. Hwang Guanho looks up from looking at what's on his phone and turns his head to the side. He looks there, eyebrows slightly raised and mouth open. He asks the girl where she is going. The girl stands in the open doorway. A jacket hangs on her hand, and she holds the door with her other hand. The girl looks at the young man standing in the room. She replies that she went to recruit a gifted one. Hwang Guanho asks her to buy food on the way. He is very hungry. A young man stands in the middle of the room, holds a phone in one hand and stretches the other along his body. The girl looks at him over her shoulder. She looks angry. Her mouth is wide open due to the fact that she is talking loudly. She asks him not to talk nonsense and orders Hwang Guanho to run after her. She needs to go quickly and put the plan into action. There are a large number of men in the gym. Some of them are training. Some are sitting and watching the fight. One is stretching his hands. A man standing a little further away is holding some paper in his hands. He smiles widely, squinting his eyes and showing his teeth. His head is perfectly styled. He is well trained. This can be seen from the pumped up muscles of his chest. He says he can't do this. The man turns his head to the side and looks over his shoulder at the girl standing behind him. A jacket is draped over her shoulders and her arms are crossed over her chest. She tilted her head slightly to the side and looked slightly away from the man with a smile. He asks the man a question, clarifying with him that he does not like the terms of the contract. She says that in this case she could give away part of the profits from the fight. A man in a black t-shirt and trousers stands near his desk, gesturing with his hands in front of him. He looks friendly as he talks to the girl who is standing in front of him. He tells her that she doesn't seem to fully understand him. It's not about the money. The girl asks what's the matter then. The man, still squinting his eyes and smiling, points his thumb to the side. There are two people standing in the training ring. One of them is wearing a black t-shirt and red shorts, and the second is wearing a black t-shirt and shorts. They stand in fighting stances with their arms out in front of them. A guy in red shorts jumps forward and is about to kick, a wide, crooked grin on his face. The second man stands in the path of the strike. An electric glow appears around his hand. The man says to the girl that when the gift awakens, their body also becomes stronger to a certain extent. This is not a problem, but if a mediocre person is hit with force, he can be seriously injured. The girl stands next to the man, who has his hands on his hips and smiles widely. She put one hand to her lips, the other supporting her elbow. The man says that people cannot be allowed to suffer for the sake of profit, and asks the girl if this is true. She thinks about the question. The young man opens his mouth wide, exposing his teeth. He lets out a loud laugh. Hwang Guanho sits on the sofa with one leg crossed over the other. He placed one hand on the back of the sofa and raised the other to his face, his mouth wide open, tears flowing from his eyes. He laughingly says that they gathered brats who don't really know how to fight. They are just showing off themselves. He asks someone if this is a playground for them or something. The girl stands opposite the man and looks up at him. There is a wide smile on her face. Her eyebrows are slightly raised. Hwang Guanho is still sitting on the sofa, with one arm thrown over the back and the other on the armrest. He looks unhappy. The man asks the girl who Hwang Guanho is. She replies that he is a mediocre professional fighter. He is participating in this project. The girl stands next to the man. Her eyes are closed, and there is a wide and pleading smile on her face. She folded her hands, palms facing each other, and raised them in front of her in a pleading gesture. The man glances at her with narrowed eyes. The girl calls Hwang Guanho's full name and asks him to close his mouth. She and the man are having a very important conversation. The man opened his eyes and looked intently in front of him. Hwang Guanho looks back at him in surprise and indignation, his mouth slightly open. He folded his hands on his legs. Hwang Guanho asks the man why he is looking at him. The girl smiles widely, clenching her teeth tightly. Her gaze promises bad consequences for Hwang Guanho. The man walked up to Hwang Guanho and extended his hand in front of him, palm up. He smiled lightly. The young man is still sitting on the sofa and looking at the man. He says that no matter how hard he tries to provoke him, he still won't succeed. This gift first of all brings benefit to people. The young man rests his hands on his knees. He has his head down and looks somewhat tense. He says that initially it was a way to kill people like him who talk a lot. Wang Guanho looks ahead with his eyes wide open. The look is confident and challenging. He turns to the man and asks him if he is afraid that Wang Guanho will defeat him at once. The man is still calm, his eyes are still narrowed. He says he has nothing more to say to them and orders them to leave. A girl and Wang Guanho are walking down the street, a jacket hanging on her arm. The girl walks slightly ahead, the young man trails behind, with his hands in his jacket pockets. Wang Guanho has caught up with the girl and walks next to her, still putting his hands in his pockets. He has a slightly surprised look on his face. The girl next to him gets angry, baring her teeth. She looks at Wang Guanho, turning her head slightly in his direction. The young man says that this is so strange and asks why he didn't agree. The girl replies that the man told everything. He can't, because other people might get hurt. She again slightly pulled ahead and walks with her back to Wang Guanho. He looks at her back. There are some shops around them, and a road runs nearby. She says that if they could somehow solve this, she would convince him. And if Wang Guanho had not butted into the conversation. Wang Guanho smiles widely, his figure illuminated by the sun. He brought his hand to his face and stuck his finger into his nostril. He asks if she really believes the words of gifted guys. He says that the man clearly thinks that they are nothing more than insects to him. The girl has already moved a short distance away from Wang Guanho. He is still standing near the corner of the building and makes a playful blow to the air with his hand. There's a contented grin on his face, his eyebrows slightly drawn together at the bridge of his nose. He says that you need to get under their skin so that their real essence comes out, and then fight. The girl orders him to stop and tells him to go home. A young man stands in a fighting stance in the middle of the street and looks in surprise at the girl's back. She stands with her back to him and looks straight ahead. The girl seems somewhat tired. Wang Guanho asks a silent question, to which the girl tells him that that's all for today, let him go home, and she will go recruit participants on her own. The girl turns her head slightly towards the guy and casts a dissatisfied and gloomy look at him. Wang Guanho says that he left work just in time. Everything turned out well. The girl says with disappointment that she thought this idiot was a genius. The young man put his hands in his pockets. He stands near a wide column and looks at the girl's back. She stands near the road, holding a jacket in her hands. He asks the girl if he can go and if she will ask him to help with something later. He thinks questioningly that since the work is finished, then the formalities can be released. The girl left silently. Wang Guanho continues to look at the place where she just stood. His gaze expresses bewilderment and some dissatisfaction. He turns the other way and is about to leave, putting his hands in his pockets. The guy glances over his shoulder in the direction where the girl went. He has a smug grin on his face. He says about the girl that she is very naive. Someone is moving a blue mop across the floor. Behind this man stands a young man in red shorts and a black t-shirt. There is a towel on his shoulder. With one hand he holds the edge. The guy looks at the back of the man standing in front of him. He asks him what he is doing, calling him a coach. The man looks ahead and seems serious and concentrated. He makes a questioning sound, as if asking again. This is the same man the girl was talking to. He holds a mop in his hands, veins popping out on his forearms. You can see how strong and pumped he is. The man says that the entrance here is a little dirty. The girl puts a blue metal can of drink to her lips and takes a sip from it. In the background you can see a building and the bright sun. The girl is sitting at the table. She has a can of drink in her hands, and there is another one standing next to her. She put her jacket on the seat next to her. Apparently the sun is already setting. A soft yellow light is spreading on the street. The girl tilted her head slightly forward and to the side. Her eyes were closed, her eyebrows furrowed slightly. She makes some sound and says that this is a good plan and asks herself if she really won't be able to find anyone. She is holding a phone in her hand. The screensaver is installed on its screen. This is a photo of a girl with a boy holding a bouquet of flowers in his hands. He doesn't look very happy while she smiles happily. The girl says that it's already 11 o'clock and makes an assumption that she might finish for today. The boy in the photo is very similar to the girl. He has the same yellow eyes as hers, and the hair color is also similar. He is wearing a brown jacket and a white shirt with a beige tie. A girl sits indoors at a table with an umbrella above it. There is a poster behind the girl, and boxes are located near the window. She sits with her elbows on the tabletop, a phone in her hands. She has white sneakers on her feet and walks on the asphalt. The girl climbed up the stairs. In her hand she holds an orange package with something. With her other hand she holds onto the railing. A drop of sweat runs down the girl's cheek. She seems exhausted and tired. Apparently it was difficult for her to get up. The girl thinks to herself that she won't finish now, she'll try again. The girl remembers how she stood next to the coach, who looked towards his fighters with a smile. She thinks that if she tells him what she didn't have time to do last time, she might be able to convince him to take part. Who knows? She approached a room with glass doors. A yellow lamp was burning on the ceiling. She asks if anyone is here. The girl walked into the training room, holding an orange bag in front of her. The gym is empty, no one is working out on the machines. Now there is an opportunity to take a closer look at it. Near the left wall there is a row of training bags. A little further there are exercise machines and a ring, where training battles are held. There are metal structures on the ceiling, perhaps also serving as training equipment. She says she came to them earlier about a project and asks if there is something else they can discuss. The girl stands near the glass doors, clutching a package of something to herself and looking into the depths of the hall. There are some training items on the floor. The girl examines the room. There are lockers for clothes on the side of her. She was illuminated by the light of the lamps and walked a little deeper into the room. The girl glances to the side. She looks a little unsure. In her hands there is still a yellow package with something. Perhaps it's drinks. The hair on one side of her face is tucked behind her ear, and on the other side her bangs hang down, covering her eye and making it difficult to see. But it doesn't bother her. The girl glances sideways behind her, a drop of sweat running down her cheek. Behind her is a man holding his head with his hands, another hand covering his face. The girl begins to say a phrase about the fact that there really is no one, but does not finish it. A man's hand suddenly grabs her by the neck. The girl leans back due to the blow. She waves her hands in the air and closes her eyes. A purple glow emanates from the man's hand. The girl's hair flies into the air. The orange package flies out of her hands and falls down. A strong, huge male hand holds her neck, squeezing it. The girl grabbed it with her hands and squeezed her fingers, trying to tear it away from her neck. She opened her mouth wide, drool dripping from the corner. The girl coughs due to lack of air. The coach has a lot of hands. He looks like he's tired of what's going on. The man's eyes are closed. There is a slightly angry grin on his face. His two arms are raised above his head and bizarrely curved. He presses one to his chest, and with the other he holds the girl. It seems that he does not strain at all and does not waste his strength on it, although the veins on his arm are swollen. He says that he just cleaned everything up, and these cockroaches appeared again. The man pushes the girl away from him. She flies a fairly long distance, waving her arms and legs in the air. The coach stands in the middle of the hall, clenching all his hands into fists. The girl is reclining on the floor of the hall, leaning on one hand, pressing the other to her throat. She bent one leg at the knee. Her whole appearance spoke of an attempt to defend herself. There is great fear on her face. Her mouth is wide open. She asks the man to wait, having difficulty pronouncing the words. The man tensed the muscles in his arms and looked straight. The girl now leans on two hands and looks at the coach with fear. A bead of sweat runs down her cheek. She apologizes several times and asks if it is because of what happened earlier or not. The man smirks slightly at the corner of his lips, so subtle that it is almost impossible to notice. It seems that with every second, the girl begins to get more and more nervous. Her eyes are wide open, her pupils are constricted, and beads of sweat are running down her cheeks. She speaks with a stutter, once again asks for forgiveness for what happened, calls to calm down. The man's eyes are narrowed, his mouth is unpleasantly twisted. He looks angry and not entirely adequate. He says he doesn't care about what happened. He jumps forward, waving all his arms. They are clenched into fists. He is clearly going to resolve the issue by force. The impact causes a bright purple flash. Clouds of dust rise into the air. There is a dusty haze in the training room. The girl watches what is happening in horror. Sweat flows all over her face. Her mouth is slightly open. A shadow from something falls on her. The coach looms over the girl, his fist raised in the air, clearly about to hit her. She, in turn, lies on the floor. Both the man and the girl look in surprise at Huang Guanho, who stands nearby and rests his foot on one of the man's hands, moving it away from the girl's face. He encourages them to look. He has a wide, smug grin on his face. The neck muscles are tense and clearly visible. He does not look tense or surprised. Huang Guanho looks down on this composition. He says he knew it. He asks the girl if he was right about this guy. The coach looks at him with narrowed eyes. His eyebrows are furrowed and wrinkles appear around his mouth. He raises his fist in front of him, pushes Huang Guanho's leg away, and is about to attack him. A purple glow emanates from the man's hands. Huang Guanho is a little surprised, but doesn't seem particularly scared. The coach, with a serious and concentrated expression on his face, strikes in front of him with enormous force. He doesn't seem to care much that there is a mediocre person in front of him. A fight breaks out between the men. The coach actively waves all his hands clenched into a fist. Hwang Guanho deftly dodges blows. The hall is illuminated by purple flashes. The girl stands aside and watches the battle. She says Hwang Guanho's full name questioningly. He is about to do something, raising his leg. He suddenly throws it up and attacks the coach, intending to hit him in the head. The man spread his arms to the sides, watching the young man. Hwang Guanho smugly says that they will finish here and now. Hwang Guanho strikes the coach, and it seems that he is as strong as a man. The young man's arms are spread out to the sides to maintain balance. Hwang Guanho lowered his foot to the floor, kicking up dust into the air. The man covered his head with all his hands. He looks into the small crack, eyes wide open. There are bruises on his arm at the site of the impact. He says something in surprise about a bug. Hwang Guanho stands half sideways to him, turning his head. There is a wide, smug smile on his face. The young man clearly has no doubt in his abilities. He asks the man if he is really so afraid of insects that he attacked on the sly. He asks a question mockingly about the fact that he even knows how to parry a blow. The man becomes furious. All his daytime calm was feigned. He angrily attacks Hwang Guanho. He swings 3 fists. His eyebrows are drawn to the bridge of his nose. His mouth is wide open in a scream. He shouts that this is all complete nonsense. The coach starts throwing punches with all his arms at Hwang Guanho, purple flashes appearing in the air. The young man put his hands in front of him, shielding himself from the attack, creating a kind of shield. The girl watches the fight with shock and anxiety, her face illuminated by flashes of the trainer's power. A bead of sweat runs down your cheek, your eyes are wide open, as is your mouth. She thinks about the fact that this is the first time she's seen a gifted, 6-armed boxer fight. The man furiously continues to strike at Hwang Guanho, who tries to hold back his pressure and not give in. The girl thinks that such a person was in battle with other people and asks herself how she could think that this was even possible. Her bangs fall across her face, getting in the way and flashing before her eyes. Sweat runs down her cheek. She looks ahead in fear and anxiety. Hwang Guanho held back the blows, standing in a blocking stance, but with a sharp and quick movement he dodged to the side out of the path of the blows. There is a slight smirk on the young man's face. He approached the trainer and swung his hand to strike back. The man doesn't seem to have noticed the guy's movements and continues to attack the place where he was standing earlier. Hwang Guanho mockingly says that the man has so many hands and asks what he is doing. What kind of blow is this? The young man punches the coach in the face, causing him to stagger to the side. The blow was very strong and obviously unexpected for the man. Hwang Guanho says his opponent isn't even trying. Hwang Guanho stands in front of his opponent and punches him in the face, his other hand clenched into a fist and slightly pulled back. The coach threw his head to the side from the force of the blow and, waving all his arms, staggered back. The man, turning his head away from the young man, swings his lower arm upward. Hwang Guanho's hand, clenched into a fist, is in front of the man's face. The coach hits with his hand, but Hwang Guanho moves out of the way of the strike. He deftly dodges, as if anticipating the enemy's blow. The young man strikes back at the man's face. Hwang Guanho smiles, clearly enjoying the fight. He exclaims that this is what is needed. He swings and delivers another blow to the coach's face, breaking him into blood that flies in different directions. Hwang Guanho accompanies his punches with words on how to strike correctly. He hits the man sharply and he flies back, arms outstretched in front of him. His whole face is covered in blood, it splashes to the sides. Hwang Guanho says this is how you should lose. The coach is all beaten up, his nose and chin are bloody, his lips are broken. He looks ahead with a gaze that does not express any emotion. The man makes a strangled sound. The coach becomes furious. He opens his mouth wide, his face twisted in a vile grimace of anger. He once again swings his fists, not intending to give up. The coach exclaims, "Who else is teaching who here?" Hwang Guanho is completely calm. He repels the blows with a smile, without straining at all. Looks at his opponent with a confident look. He says that even so he has an advantage. With a sharp, quick movement he grabs the man's hand. Hwang Guanho holds his hand, pressing it to him as if he is hugging it. There is a wide and satisfied smile on his face. The young man looks directly at his opponent without looking away. He says there are many things a man can grab hold of. The girl continues to lie on the floor, leaning on her hands and watching the fight. Her mouth is slightly open, and a drop of sweat runs down her cheek, caused by anxiety and tension. The coach squatted down, his mouth wide open, his eyes slightly closed. One of his arms was twisted by Hwang Guanho. The young man towers over his opponent, smiling a little madly. He grabbed the wrist of one hand with the other. He says there are 5 hands left. The man looks at the young man with his narrow eyes wide open. His entire face is covered in blood and bruises. The trainer makes a sound like he's hiccuping. The man is not going to give up and tries to strike Huang Guanho. The coach's mouth is wide open in a scream, sweat running down his face. He holds his bad hand with his good one. The coach lets out a furious scream. Huang Guanho is completely calm, with a slight smile on his face. A man's fist, illuminated by a red-violet light, rushes straight towards his face. Huang Guanho strikes the trainer's arm straight, twisting it. His other hand is moved to the side. With an ominous smile on his face, he says there are 4 left. Another of the man's arms breaks, apparently causing great pain. Huang Guanho continues counting and says there are 3 left. He breaks his next arm in 2 places. The bones shatter into fragments of different sizes. Huang Guanho says there are 2 left. The arm turns out to be broken in several places. The bone is divided into several parts and many small fragments. The young man says that there is only 1 hand left. The man is furious, his mouth wide open in a scream. Anger and pain are written on the face. Sweat flows in large drops and blood flows from the nose. His hair was scattered across the floor, some strands falling onto his face. He shouts at Huang Guanho that he has no gift and calls the young man a cockroach. The coach lies on the floor, all his arms spread out to the sides. They are all bruised and unnaturally bent. The man's face is covered in blood, as is his body in some places. The coach looks very bad. You can see the pain he is experiencing right now. Huang Guanho stands over him and says that if he is a cockroach, then the coach turns out to be a worm. The young man jumps up and waves his hands clenched into fists. He punches the man right in his face. Huang Guanho stands with his back slightly bent and his hands down. There is a girl behind him and looking at him. The young man exhales noisily. He smiles and wipes the blood from his cheek with his right hand. He has a pleased and slightly cheeky expression on his face. He asks if he was right. These guys don't even see them as people. The girl continues to sit on the floor, her knees slightly bent. There is a nervous expression on her face, sweat dripping down in drops. She hesitantly agrees with the young man and thanks him for saving him. Huang Guanho stands in front of her with his hands on his hips. The guy closed his eyes and grinned widely. He begins to say a phrase about how something is about to happen now, but he doesn't finish. He looks down at the girl in surprise. His mouth is slightly open, his eyebrows are raised. The girl says that this project needs to be abandoned. The young man asks her again incomprehensibly. The man shows no signs of movement and lies on the floor, knocked out. His whole face is covered in blood. His nose is apparently broken. There is a huge bruise on it. His eyes are rolled up and his mouth is wide open. A couple of teeth are broken. There is also blood on the floor around him. The girl says that if everyone is gifted, as the young man says, like this one, then she doesn't even know. Most likely there will be no cooperation. The girl continues to sit on the floor. She shifted her body weight onto one hand, causing her to lean slightly to the side. She brought her other hand to her forehead and held her head, looking down. He is about to continue explaining, but is interrupted. Huang Guanho stands a little further away from her. The girl sits in this way, as if trying to close herself off from him. He asks why they need gifted collaboration at all. The young man walked to the corner of the training room and squatted there, turning his face to the wall. The girl sits with her back to him, looking sideways at him with a nervous glance. Sweat is running down her face. Her lips are compressed nervously. She has removed her hand from her face, but holds it suspended in front of her. The young man took the phone and holds it in his hand, turning the screen towards the girl. There's a wide smile on his face. The phone screen displays a video and a lot of comments underneath it. He says that you can just make them angry and they will come on their own. The girl looks at the guy in shock and alarm. Her bangs are in disarray and her whole look is a little rumpled. In the comments, people write that the gifted and the untalented are fighting right now. He can send a link. Other people are surprised by what is happening and doubt the reality of what is happening. Someone asks to call the police. The young man looks at the phone screen with a smile, holding it in front of him. O seems very pleased with himself. He asks the girl if she remembers the Morning Post and says that he promoted them a little there. The girl got up and approached the young man. She took the phone from his hands and looked into it. Huang Guanho stands opposite, with his hands on his hips and looking at the girl. She looks shocked, beads of sweat still running down her face. Huang Guanho says that a lot of people are watching. There will be evidence that it was self-defense. The young man smiles widely, showing all his teeth. He asks if they get cooperation. That will be good. He stands next to the six-armed man who lies on the floor. The man's whole face is covered in blood, the floor around him and his body too. This whole unattractive picture falls into the frame. The guy shows 2 fingers, as if taking a selfie in front of a landmark. He speaks, teasing and calling the gifted, urging them to look at the monitors. He says that their nature has shown itself and asks what they will do now. The girl stretches out her hand in horror towards the guy. Her mouth is twisted, her eyes are wide open. Sweat runs down her cheeks, she stutters and tries to stop the guy. He continues to say that it would be nice, calls on them to agree. He asks how lucky he was, it was great luck. He says that even without this he is stronger than them. The girl called this man to save the league, which was already almost at the bottom. A man stands in front of the TV screen, clenching his hands into fists and stretching them along his body. There are many dead or unconscious people lying around him. The man has a high ponytail tied on his head. His whole appearance speaks of tension and readiness for battle. From the TV screen, H1 Guanho says that if there are any complaints, then let them challenge him, and he will accept it. If they don't come on their own, he will find them and encourage them to train hard. A bald man sits in a church with his palms clasped in front of him. His head is slightly lowered down. Judging by his clothes, this man is a priest. His figure is illuminated by red light that enters the room through a stained glass window on the wall. The girl thinks that something is wrong with her choice. A man in a white trouser suit, under which a shirt and tie is visible, sits with his legs crossed. He rests his chin with one hand and smiles widely. 113,000 messages were written in the live chat. H1 Guanho smiles widely, raising his clenched fist in front of him. His eyes are closed. He looks happy and confident. He adds that he hasn't trained, so don't let them be afraid. The girl is very angry. She reaches out with her hand to the guy's shoulder. Her mouth is wide open in a scream. She spits as she speaks. Sweat is running down your face. Your eyes are widened with fear and anger. Demands that H1 Guanho stop now. The girl thinks that she was sure that this choice was correct. Footage of H1 Guanho fighting a 6-armed man has gone viral online. All the blows that the man delivered to the young man and the responses were captured on the phone. A huge number of people comment on them. H1 Guanho's provocations spread at breakneck speed. One of the people writes that he only recently remembered H1 Guanho, and now he reminded of himself with another provocation. Some of the commentators write that he is confident in himself, since he is trying to provoke. He will watch the next fight. However, there are people who reacted negatively to this, but some support the untalented and say that relying only on your gift is not entirely correct. A large screen attached to the side of the building shows the news starring H1 Guanho. On the screen, the presenter stands with a detached expression on her face. Next to her is a photograph of a broadly smiling H1 Guanho against the backdrop of a 6-armed man. The headline says that the news is about the provocation of former champion H1 Guanho. The girl is standing in a crowd of people under this large screen. She lowered her head down and crossed her arms over her chest. Her lips are pressed tightly together and her brows are furrowed. People of different ages have gathered behind her. A schoolboy is looking at the phone screen without looking up. Several young people are standing next to him. They all have different facial expressions, but most of them are gloomy and serious. At first, this provocation did not have a strong impact. The girl closed her eyes, continuing to stand, hugging herself with her arms and lowering her head down. Behind her are 2 young men. One of them, wearing a hat and earrings, says that H1 Guanho has attracted a lot of attention. The second young man, wearing glasses and a jumper, says that H1 Guanho provoked the gifted normally. Some people are surprised that this was even shown on the news. With every second, the girl begins to become more and more nervous and anxious. She is already covered in sweat. Her gaze is still directed downwards. Her bangs fall on her face, getting in the way and flashing before her eyes. The guy in the hat says, "Just take it and blow it out," and asks what to do now. The guy with glasses asks a question. If he were not confident in his victory, he would behave this way. The girl's face is hidden in the shadows. She is increasingly worried, listening to the conversation behind her. Sweat keeps running down her face. The guy in the hat agrees with the previous remark and makes the assumption that this is most likely why H1 Guanho decided to do something like this. The guy with glasses says that as long as his head is clear, something will apparently happen, but he did not fully pronounce the phrase. The girl frowned, a bead of sweat running down her forehead. The yellow gaze is directed downwards. Someone says that it seems to him that people are looking at him. It must be fascinating to watch someone get beaten. The girl's gaze becomes even more alarmed. She directs it forward. Some say he's not joking. He says it's her, the girl next to him. On the screen, in the news, they show a photo of a girl furiously screaming at H1 Guanho. Her mouth is wide open and she looks nervous and angry in this photo. The caption on the screen below this photo says it all happened with the league president, a bitter disagreement that went viral. The crowd looks at the girl who stands near the very edge of the pedestrian path and waits for her traffic light. Many take photographs or videotapes of her from the other side of the road, as they can see the large screen. Someone pushed the girl, and the young man next to her expressed delight out loud. A blonde and a brown-haired man are sitting near a panoramic window. One of them has a mug of coffee in his hands, and there is a plate of cookies on the table in front of him. He looks out the window, behind which there are a large number of people near the pedestrian crossing. Awareness of their true roots among the gifted, and the inequality felt by those who are not endowed with the gift. The girl tried to move away from the crowd of people. She tightly squeezed one hand on the strap of her bag. She's sweating profusely, glancing over her shoulder. People are standing there and taking pictures of her. Someone in the crowd encourages you to take pictures out loud. Phone flashes can be seen from all sides. The girl tries to hide from them by lifting her bag up and covering her face with it. She also covers her face with her other hand. This realization added fuel to the fire. The girl looks through the gap between her fingers. Her eyes are wide open, sweat running down her cheek. She is trying to say something. The word is similar to the beginning of Hwang Guanho's name. The girl makes her way through the crowd of people who have surrounded her on all sides and are taking pictures. She presses her hand to her face, trying to cover herself. The girl looks nervous, angry, and very tense. She says Hwang Guanho's full name. The young man looks ahead with a blank look. There are a lot of crumbs around his mouth. Drool is dripping from the corner of his lips, and his head is a mess. He groans and says how bored he is. Hwang Guanho sits in a chair and looks at the ceiling with his hands on the armrests. Behind him are cabinets with folders with documents on the shelves. There are a lot of snack crumbs on his clothes, and the snack packaging is lying on his lap. His gaze expresses absolutely nothing other than intense boredom. He says that everyone is fussing just for show, and asks if these guys are really afraid, why no one comes. Hwang Guanho sits at the table and eats chips, looking ahead. The girl sat down in another chair, her back hunched, her head tiredly lowered down, her hands relaxed on her hips, legs spread slightly apart. Suddenly she smiles nervously, showing her teeth. The girl lets out a nervous laugh. Hwang Guanho eats chips and looks in surprise at the girl sitting in the chair. She smiles widely, lifting her chin slightly upward. The girl begins to laugh, quietly at first, and then louder and louder. Hwang Guanho says that something good must have happened. The girl turns her head to Hwang Guanho. There are bruises under her eyes. She looks very tired. But nevertheless, there is a nervous smile on her face. Her bangs cover one of her eyes, obviously interfering with her view, but the girl does not care. She asks Hwang Guanho about good things with some threat. The girl took off, moving quickly. She walked up to the table where Hwang Guanho was sitting and put her foot, shod in a white sneaker, on it. One of her hands is clenched into a fist, and with the other she points directly at the young man. The girl is dressed in a dark blue trouser business suit. The trousers are high-waisted, the jacket is cropped, and her blouse is a little lighter, but the look still looks harmonious. There are chairs and a table behind her. She says that there really is something good. As of today, Hwang Guanho is expelled again. The girl looks seriously and angrily at the young man. Her gaze is fixed directly on the guy. Her mouth is slightly open. She asks him where is the respect during the conversation. Why, since last time he is addressing her as if she is his girlfriend. Hwang Guanho sits relaxed in a chair, leaning on the armrest. One of his hands is inside the bag of snacks, the other he holds it. There is a wide, crooked smile on the young man's face. He says that she just excluded him anyway and asks if there is any point. The girl is still standing with her foot on the table, but she has lowered her hand and looks at the young man in confusion. He sits opposite her, his head slightly tilted to the side. The girl chuckles, puzzled, and the guy says that it's clear from her that she's panicking now, so he'll tell him straight. Hwang Guanho put his hand on the girl's shoulder, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. A bead of sweat runs down her cheek. Hwang Guanho hugs her and reaches for the phone in her jacket pocket. The girl stands next to him and looks straight at him, sweat running down her face. At this time, Hwang Guanho smiles widely, leaning slightly towards the girl. He says that she is now in the same boat with him. The young man glances sideways at her, narrowing his eyes slightly. He says that she constantly told him that she had nothing to do with it. That bad man Hwang Guanho did everything himself. The girl's pupil constricted, sweat running down her face. She furrowed her brows, her bruises under her eyes clearly visible in the lighting. Hwang Guanho continues to say that she said so, hoping that people will believe it. Hwang Guanho walked away from the girl and turned his back to her, spreading his arms to the sides. In one of them he holds a telekinesis. A wide smile shines on his face, his eyes are slightly closed. The girl stands near the table and looks angrily at the young man, clenching her hands into fists. She looks so nervous and seems a little hurt. She asks him if this is why he saved her. Apparently for this reason, she is somewhat offended by the young man. Wang Guanho replies that it's not that important anymore. He stops near the door, half turning towards the girl. One of the guy's hands is in his pocket, in the other he holds the phone. He says that what matters now is that they are now in the same boat and asks if she understands. Next she asks whether they can now order food with her money. The girl thinks to herself that it is impossible to say that he is wrong. It was as if an insight descended on the girl. She looked down, sweat still flowing down her face. The girl's mouth is slightly open. In the background, windows are visible, behind which there are tall high-rise buildings. She goes on to reflect that given the circumstances, people wouldn't believe she had nothing to do with it. The girl's arm is extended along her body. She slightly clenched her fingers, pressing them against her leg. The girl clenched her hand tightly into a fist. She thinks that in this case only something can happen, but the thought breaks off again. Wang Guanho stands with his phone in his hand, scrolling through a food delivery app. He turns his head slightly towards the girl. He is focused on the choice. The girl called him by name. She stands in the same place, clenching both hands into a fist and looking furiously at the young man. Her mouth is wide open, her bangs covering one eye. Wang Guanho turns fully to her and looks at the girl. She says that his provocation this time has become a big problem. It is very dangerous. At this rate, if he loses the first battle, all this interest will turn into a barrage of criticism. The girl looks at the guy with a furious and angry expression on her face. She is covered in sweat. Her mouth is wide open and her brows are furrowed. The girl thinks that first of all, she needs to figure out what this not particularly smart young man is thinking about. She asks Wang Guanho if he has a technique that he can use to be sure he will win in a fight against professional talents. Wang Guanho apparently considered the conversation exhausted and stood sideways to the girl. One of his hands was in his pocket, and in the other he was holding the phone. Wang Guanho bent one leg at the knee and put it forward. The young man turned his head towards the girl, who was expressing anger and indignation with her whole appearance. Her hands are clenched into fists and extended along her body. She slightly tilted her body forward, which looks threatening. The shadow falls on half of her face, hiding the expression of her eyes and making them black. But it is clear that the girl has furrowed her eyebrows and pursed her lips tightly. Now you can see that there are some cups on the glass shelves of the cabinet, and near the window there are shelves with various objects standing on them. There are also several fresh flowers in pots. She thinks that she would never do something like this without thinking carefully about it before. Wang Guanho tells her that he doesn't have any equipment. The girl is shocked by this answer. Her eyebrows are raised high, her eyes are wide open, as is her mouth. She looks at the young man in shock. He looks back at her with a calm expression on his face, not worrying about anything at all. He still holds the phone in his hand. He asks her why she needs another technique and says that he can win anyway. The girl says that last time his opponent was just an amateur. Professionals have a completely different level. She asks him how he will win. Wang Guanho turns away from her and looks back at the phone screen. His mouth is slightly curved. The guy looks focused on what he is doing. He says that he won not because he was an amateur, but because he was a professional. The phone screen displays an inscription that the order has been placed and you have to wait 30 minutes before delivery. The girl looks at the young man from under her brows in shock and puzzlement. A drop of sweat runs down his cheek, his eyebrows furrow slightly. Wang Guanho hands her the phone with a calm expression on his face, his mouth slightly open. The girl asks him again, to which he answers that she never asked about such things. The young man is still holding out the phone in her direction. The girl looks at him with frowning eyebrows. Her look does not bode well for him. He says he doesn't know why she thinks he'll blow it. The girl's gaze becomes harder and angrier with every word. Wang Guanho looks back at her confidently and a little tiredly with his bright blue eyes. He says he never loses. The girl took her phone and stands next to the guy, looking at him tiredly. The dark circles under her eyes stand out against her fair skin. Wang Guanho stands with his hands in his pockets. She silently reacts to his words. The girl's hand nervously squeezes the fabric of her trousers. Wang Guanho looks at her seriously and seems a little gloomy. She asks him if he knows who she will fight. A girl and a young man stand opposite each other. The girl raised her shoulders. One of her arms is stretched along her body. In the second, she squeezes the phone and holds it near her chest. Wang Guanho replies that he will wait and see. There hasn't been a single call yet, so apparently they are all cowards. The girl opened her mouth in surprise. She clearly didn't expect to hear this from him. Her eyebrows are raised. She lowered both arms along her body. Hwang Guanho says something about guys, but doesn't finish the sentence. The girl looks ahead nervously, her face illuminated by a purple glow. A purple flash moves towards Hwang Guanho, who squinted his eyes in her direction and ducked. A man's hand in white clothes is extended forward. Pieces of some kind of coating and dust are flying around. A man in a white suit stands in a hole that appeared in the wall due to his appearance. Clouds of dust fly in the air. The man smiles widely, raising one hand up and placing it on his forehead, as if trying to make a visor that will protect him from the dust. He goes inside the room. He steps firmly with his feet shod in brown boots. The man stops next to Hwang Guanho and looks down at him. He is almost 2 heads taller than the young man. Hwang Guanho stands in front of him with his hands in his pockets and looks bored into the man's eyes. He lifts his glasses from his eyes and leans closer to Hwang Guanho, smiling widely. Hwang Guanho looks at him calmly, but he is clearly not particularly happy with such closeness. The man says that the young man is short. Some girl is standing near the front door. She clutches a blue folder to her chest, holding the handle with her other hand. There is a tired expression on her face. The bruises under her eyes are clearly visible. She asks how many times she needs to be told that she can enter the room through the door. Apparently, this is not the first time this has happened. She looks at the situation in the room. A tall man stands next to Hwang Guanho, and the girl watches from the side. Everyone looks towards the newcomer. The man agrees and says that he forgot. Then he asks what will happen to him for this. The girl lets out a long laugh and calls the man not very smart. The man glances sideways at Hwang Guanho, a smile on his face. The young man looks at him wearily, his mouth parted. He asks the man who he is. He smiles widely, looking down at him. He has a smug look on his face. He replies that he is not a coward. The girl nervously looks at the man and smiles. Beads of sweat are running down her face. She is clearly alarmed by what is happening. The girl lets out a kind of strangled laugh. Hwang Guanho brings his hand to his sleeve to roll it up and looks at the man with a smile. He is clearly not worried and is confident in himself. Hwang Guanho is happy and asks if they will start right away. The man smiles widely, raising his hand with his index finger extended upward. The jacket is too tight on him, as if it were too small for him. The man responds negatively, saying that today he did not come to fight. He brings his finger closer to his face, where an unpleasant smile spreads. Wrinkles are very clearly visible, which shows his age. The man says that he would like to talk to Hwang Guanho about something. The young man stands with his index finger inserted into his nostril. He opens his mouth wide. His whole appearance betrays boredom. He asks what they want to talk to him about and makes an assumption about it, that the man doesn't want to fight. The man does not change his position. He still stands, raising his finger to his face and grinning widely. He says that this is not the point, they should fight in a professional ring. After all, his soul is also eager to fight. Hwang Guanho walked closer to the man and leaned slightly in his direction, as if studying his opponent. He still stands with his finger to his cheek. The man smiles widely as he looks down at Hwang Guanho. 2 wrinkles are visible on his forehead. A young man looks up at a man. He invites him to try to hit him in the jaw before the fight. The girls stand nearby and look at what is happening, each watching the person with whom she came. They are quite similar in appearance. The men are standing opposite each other. Hwang Guanho looks serious. The girl with yellow eyes looks at Hwang Guanho, sweating profusely. She took a step forward and extended her hand in front of her. The second girl looks at her with a tired look. The girl with yellow eyes calls on Hwang Guanho to wait and says that he said that now they are partners with him. She is in the same boat and asks him, "Is it so?" He continues to say that they need to talk and exchange opinions. The girl puts her open palm in front of her in a stopping gesture. Her mouth is wide open, as are her eyes, and beads of sweat are running down her face. She calls on Hwang Guanho to wait, says that now there is no way to hit first. There is no need to do this. Hwang Guanho smiles widely, raising his hand up and opening his palm. Behind him stands a tense girl with yellow eyes and a tired man's assistant, who looks at her with a puzzled and gloomy look. Hwang Guanho tells her not to worry and asks her if she really thinks that he can be captured with tricks like that. The girl looks anxious, nervous and scared. Sweat is rolling down her face. Her mouth is slightly open and her eyebrows are raised, as if she is asking for something. Her hand is raised forward, fingers spread apart. She lowers her hand down, clenching her palm. The girl with yellow eyes closes her eyes and smiles nervously. She agrees with the young man. Hwang Guanho stands in front of the man and is about to punch him in the face. He quickly brings his hand forward. The young man does not look nervous or scared. He asks the man why he gave orders here. The girl with yellow eyes pressed her hand to her face, closing her open mouth. Her eyes are wide open and directed towards the fight. Beads of sweat run down her face. Huang Guanho punches the man in the face, causing him to stagger back a little. Huang Guanho says that when someone tries to command him, he is dying to do the opposite. Huang Guanho strikes the man and swings his other hand, clenched into a fist. A red flash appears from the collision site. The young man says that if they tell him not to hit him, then he really wants to hit someone. Huang Guanho holds the man with his hand, and the other is about to strike. He says that on the other hand, when he is told to hit, he really wants to hit him in the face. Huang Guanho punches the man's cheek. This makes her recoil to the side. The young man says that he will stop bossing around here. The blow of the fist only left a dent in the man's face. He grabbed Huang Guanho's hand with his own. There are small bruises on the man's face. The fist has moved the skin, forming folds. Huang Guanho holds the man by the collar, and he tore off his other hand with a slight movement. The man has a wide smile on his face and blood is flowing from his nose and the corner of his mouth. The man looks at the guy from top to bottom, eyes wide open, which seem to glow from within. He says that he likes Huang Guanho. He asks him what he thinks about their battle. About 10 days later, Huang Guanho smiles wryly, showing his teeth. He doesn't look upset that his punch didn't cause any serious damage. Half of the guy's face is hidden in shadow. He says that since this is not an order, it suits him, and he learns quickly. The man raised his hand with his finger extended, which he bent like a hook. He looks at his hand with a pleased expression on his face and a wide, crooked grin. He agrees with Huang Guanho and says he's pretty smart. He asks if he understands correctly that Huang Guanho is giving his consent. The blue folder that the girl brought contains a contract for the League of Gifted People. It contains several points about the type of match, its rules and income distribution. The men stand opposite each other with satisfied expressions on their faces. They are clearly happy with how everything turned out. The girl in a short skirt holds a folder with a contract in front of her. She looks at the folder with serious green eyes. The girl's forehead is covered with bangs. The girl reads that their side will be responsible for the fight. But the match with the untalented is non-standard, so it will not be a formal match, but an event one. Huang Guanho holds a blue folder in his hands and carefully reads what is written there. One of his hands is in his pocket. Behind the young man's back is a girl with yellow eyes and glances nervously in his direction. Opposite is a man with his assistant. Huang Guanho hands the folder over his shoulder for the girl with yellow eyes to take. He glances sideways in her direction. The girl took the folder in her hands and holds it in front of her, looking at the guy from under her brows. Drops of sweat are running down her face. She still hasn't calmed down. Huang Guanho smiles widely, eyes narrowed and eyebrows raised. The girl opened the folder and, flipping through the sheets, reads what was written there. Her look is confused and focused. She says she will read it now. Huang Guanho asks her how everyone is, if they are joking. The girl seemed to notice something. Her gaze settled on something. Drops of sweat are still running down her face. The girl put her hand to her face and stands behind the young man. Huang Guanho put his hands in his pockets and pressed his head into his shoulders a little, which made him appear wider. The man and his assistant stand opposite and look at them. The girl says that the terms of this contract are really good for them. The girl says that they offer such conditions for several reasons, and in this they are extremely careful. The girl still has her hand near her face, but she has taken her eyes off the contract and is looking at the man and the girl. Huang Guanho seems disinterested. His face expresses boredom, and these questions clearly do not interest him very much. The man asks the question that if it weren't for them, they wouldn't have had an opponent to fight with. And then he asks another clarifying question about whether anyone else has offered a fight. Huang Guanho smiles at the corner of his mouth. The man looks at the young man, smiling. A girl stands behind his shoulder and looks at Huang Guanho with pursed lips. The young man reacts to the man's words. Huang Guanho tilts his head slightly and looks at the man with a wide smile. He raised one eyebrow in a questioning gesture. He asks the man if this is his doing. He holds a pen in his fingers. The young man signs in a special column. Behind him stands a girl with yellow eyes. She raised her hands to chest level. The young man closed the folder and threw it in the direction of the man and the girl. Huang Guanho stands with his throwing arm extended forward, the other one pulled back. The body is tilted. He took a step forward with one leg. The room seemed to get darker. The folder flies, engulfed in a violet light and emitting small sparks. This glow is somewhat cosmic. The young man asks them if they are playing dirty. A man catches a folder that was flying right into his face. He seems a little surprised, raising his eyebrows slightly and rounding his mouth. He makes a surprised sound. Wang Guanho stands with his back slightly hunched and frowns at his future opponent. Behind him stands an anxious and tense girl with yellow eyes. The young man says that they will find out what he is capable of and calls the man bald. The man holds his hand near his face with a folder clutched in it. A wide smile shines on his face, revealing his snow-white teeth. He looks joyful and content, as he did almost all the time before. He tells Wang Guanho not to relax, calling him a brat. The girl with yellow eyes attacked the young man, clutching his clothes with her hands. She holds him by the collar, her fingers clenched. She opens her mouth wide and glares at Wang Guanho, a bead of sweat running down her face, her eyebrows furrowed, her hair tucked behind her ears. He, in turn, smiles widely and laughs, tears flowing from his eyes. The young man hugged his stomach with his hands and slightly tilted his body to the side. The young man's head is a mess, with individual strands sticking out in different directions. Wang Guanho says that his future opponent is good at this. The girl is indignant and asks the young man why he always does as he pleases. The girl reprimands the young man furiously, her mouth wide open, her eyes narrowed, sweat running down her face. Wang Guanho holds her hand by the wrist and smiles widely, looking at the girl's face. The man stands in the distance and watches this picture with confusion. He says that they are done with the contract and that's it for today, they will go. He hopes that they will discuss the rest in the ring. Wang Guanho tells him to hurry up and tells them to leave already. A young man wrings the hand of a girl with yellow eyes, holding her by the shoulder. At the same time, he does not look at her, but at his future opponent, who stands nearby and watches. The girl with yellow eyes folds herself in half and looks at the floor, with one hand pressed against Wang Guanho's palm. The girl's legs are bent at the knees. The young man asks how they will leave. He hopes that through the door. The man answers, also questioningly, that he has already mentioned that he is smart. He turns his back to Wang Guanho and the girl with yellow eyes and heads towards the door, raising one hand up. He turns his head back slightly and smiles widely and says that this time he remembers. The man reaches out with his palm to the door handle. He turns it, but apparently does not calculate the force and crushes the door with this movement. It compresses as easily as if it were made of paper. A man stands in front of a crumpled door. He is so tall that it seems he will have to bend over to calmly pass through the doorway without hitting his head. Wang Guanho stands and looks at what is left after the arrival of his future opponent. There was a huge hole in the wall, which was made by a man with enormous strength. Since he was able to make such a hole without straining, cracks appeared from it. The door is crumpled and removed from its hinges. It stands next to the opening and is clearly in need of repair. The man's assistant turns her head back and looks into the room. She looks completely unsurprised and calm, as if she sees this every day. She tells them to contact him so they can be reimbursed. Wang Guanho looks bored again. He has his back slightly hunched and he is looking straight ahead. Behind him stands an angry girl with yellow eyes, who lowered her head down and opened her mouth. Wang Guanho turns to her and looks at the girl. She raised her head slightly, but still did not look at the guy. Her shoulders were hunched, and her arms hung loosely along her body. Wang Guanho says that he should have worked so hard to promote online and asks if she agrees with him. The first fight and already the League of Gifted People. The young man stands near a hole in the wall and looks at the girl with a smile. He's clearly not worried about the upcoming fight. The girl looks back at him, a drop of sweat running down her cheek. She says it was worth it. The girl stands tiredly in the middle of the office, her shoulders down. She looks like she's ready to explode at any moment. The ceiling has collapsed above her head. The lamps are hanging inside the office. The ceiling seems to be collapsing and falling down in pieces. The girl with yellow eyes asks whether it was worth it, as if she doubts it. A black car is parked in the middle of the street, next to buildings with bright signs. Behind her is some kind of tall pipe. Someone is speaking. That in this month alone there have already been 27 claims for damages. The girl, who is the bald man's assistant, sits in the front seat of the car. The man sits in the back, exactly in the center. The girl turned to him and looked over her shoulder. She asks her how to solve them all. The fighters belong to the League of Gifted People. A man sits in the back seat wearing gold-rimmed glasses. A familiar, wide smile shines on his face. He says today is a good day, encourages her not to worry about small things. According to their rank, they are assigned a specific color. He is at the top among them. A man is sitting in a dark shirt and white trousers. He has his arms spread wide, throwing them over something. There are some purple flashes shining behind him. Only 3 fighters are endowed with such power. Standing in the ring is the same man who will soon fight Wang Guanho. He towers over the opponent who is in front of him. This is Terminator Paul Roney. The red-haired man stands in a fighting stance. His hands are clenched into a fist, and he is wearing gloves. This person's gaze is directed straight. His eyebrows are drawn to the bridge of his nose. His hair and arms catch fire and he lunges forward towards Paul Roney. The reason why he is called the Terminator is simple. Paul Roney smiles widely and looks down at his opponent, not tense at all. The enemy swings his arms, which are engulfed in fire. There is a large difference in height between these men. The fiery man seemed to disappear into thin air, and an orange spot with flashes appeared in the place where he had just stood. Paul Roney continues to stand calmly, his hands clenched into fists. The fiery one quickly moves towards the bald man. He ended up behind him. The fire one jumps forward, swinging to attack. There is a wide grin on his face, even his eyebrows are on fire. The fiery one flies forward, putting one leg in front of him and swinging his burning hand. The reason is that the lives of the opponents who fought with him were interrupted. The man lands on the floor, skidding marks forming behind his legs. He stands with his knees slightly bent. Fiery looks ahead in bewilderment, a drop of sweat running down his cheek. His hair flutters, sending sparks in different directions. He is surprised out loud and asks where it is. The man falls backwards, his hands captured by Paul Roney. Fiery swings his legs in the air as the bald man leans down. Paul Roney throws his opponent, and with such force that his silhouette is blurred in the air. Paul Roney stands in the ring next to his defeated opponent, who lies in the crater created by the blow. A man in black, perhaps a judge, is already approaching them. This frame is displayed on the monitor screen. Someone paused it. The girl looks at the screen with her hands on the table. She looks worried, a bead of sweat running down her cheek. On the sofa, in front of her, sits Hwang Guanho with his feet on the table. In his hand he holds some strange thing that looks like a massager. The girl stammers and asks that Paul Roney is the best fighter. The girl puts her hand to her forehead and clenches her teeth and bares her teeth desperately. She closes her eyes and looks as if everything is not going according to plan. Hwang Guanho looks at her and rejoices at the girl's words. She thinks that they easily fell for it. It was not the clauses of the contract that were important. An inscription consisting of red letters lights up on a black background. This is Hwang Guanho's counter until death. The girl, compressing her lips into a thin line, looks at the monitor screen where Paul Roney stands next to his defeated opponent. The girl randomly thinks about the match and Paul Roney's goal, but breaks off the thought. Hwang Guanho sits looking bored, his eyes rolled upward. He holds the massager near him and shakes. He says that he is already used to the vibration. The girl with yellow eyes thinks it through to the end. All this was a ceremony to eliminate Hwang Guanho. The inscription on the death counter changes. Now it says there are 10 days left.